Now, here's a question I get a lot. Why does the track on the London Underground have 4 rails? Electric railways in Britain generally either pick up electricity from overhead wires or a third rail. The Underground is very unusual. So first point, what are those 4 rails for? Well, let's look at a bit of track and see. Now, the uppermost rail here is the positive or pickup rail from which the trains draw current. The next one down is a running rail, i.e. the train's wheels run on it. Then you have the negative or return rail through which the current is returned. And the lowest rail is the other running rail. The positive and negative rails are set slightly higher than the running rails. This is so that the train's pickup shoes, the funny little pad things that collect the current, don't interfere with the running rails when passing over points. Normally on railways, the return current goes through the running rails. There were 2 practical reasons for not doing this on the Underground in the early 20th century. The first was to do with earth leakage, i.e. electricity escaping into the earth and causing all sorts of havoc. The deep-level tube tunnels were lined with cast iron rings, and of course the earth around was full of pipes. This is even more true now than it was then. If you remember your school chemistry lessons, which I don't, you may have figured out the problem here. With electricity zapping around the place and making a nuisance of itself, there's a risk of electrolysis occurring, corroding the tunnel rings, pipes, and anything else metallic that got in its way. Therefore, the government set a legal limit on the amount of earth leakage. The lines could have no more than 7 volts lost across their entire length. The rails that carry current are held on insulated ceramic pots to keep everything nicely separated. The second reason isn't such an issue now, but it was to do with signalling. Signalling on the Underground relies on track circuits, which detect where a train is on the line and transmit that information back to the signal cabin. This used to use direct current, so it was useful that they could keep the signalling system and the power circuits separate. These days, alternating current is usually used, so this really isn't a factor. And don't ask me why, I can barely even wire a plug. So aside from the practical arguments, were there any other reasons? Historical reasons? Historical reasons involving people with eccentric personalities? You bet. Once again, as with so many idiosyncrasies of the tube, we have to thank transport tycoon and all-round bounder Charles Tyson Yerkes. Yerkes came from Chicago at the end of the 19th century and set about buying up a whole lot of underground lines that were in the planning stages. While I often talk about what a shady character Yerkes was, it can't be denied that he knew his stuff when it came to mass transit, having gained plenty of experience in the States. Direct current was the best way to do things in his opinion, and his opinion was the one that mattered. In 1902, work started on a massive power station at Lots Road in Chelsea. Actually, direct current wasn't entirely novel. There were already tube lines that used it, namely the City and South London Railway, the Waterloo and City Railway, the Great Northern and City Railway, and the Central London Railway. So it was, to use an Americanism, a no-brainer. The trouble with no-brainers is that they can be circumvented by people refusing to use their brains, and that's where the Circle Line comes in. One of the lines Yerkes bought out was the District Railway. This was a steam-hauled line in dire need of electrification. Well, as far as he was concerned, there was no question about it, it was going to be DC. The trouble was that the District Railway shared track with the Metropolitan Railway, on what was then the Inner Circle and is now known as the Circle Line. The Metropolitan were planning to electrify, but they favoured an alternating current system using overhead wires produced by Ganz of Hungary. Actually, until Yerkes came along, the District were fine with that, but Yerkes was a man with a forceful personality, and if he said DC, then gosh dang it, they'd have DC and they'd just have to like it. Well, it wasn't quite as simple as that. The matter did have to go to arbitration, but in the end it was decided in Yerkes' favour. He even, rather cheekily, offered to sell the Metropolitan some of his leftover electricity. It wasn't smooth running from then on. Most obviously, the Metropolitan and District engineers didn't communicate adequately. so the conductor rails on the sections the Metropolitan were responsible for were built to a lower height than the District ones. When the test train switched from Metropolitan to District track, the conductor shoes were knocked off to everyone's embarrassment. Nevertheless, in 1905, a regular electric service began. As more underground lines were built or absorbed by Yerke's Underground Electric Railways of London, the system was standardised throughout and continues, under London Underground, to this day. Alright, it's time for today's question from the comments section. So today's question is, what is your least favourite station and why? Well, I'm going to say Bank, for lots of reasons. It's huge and sprawling and totally non-intuitive to get around. It's always hot and crowded, and I think there could be a video in this. But yes, it's Bank. I avoid it whenever possible. Sorry, Bank fans. Hello all, I hope you enjoyed this powerful tale from the tube. If your interest was sparked, it would be wonderful if you would click the like button and consider subscribing for more electrifying content. As always, I'd like to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon for your support. You are the return rail to my cast iron tunnel rings. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.